myself for some reason. Oh.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone around the world. This is your boy, Apollos Christian Apologetics, and today I'm being joined by the Lamb Apologetics and external from ImagoLogos once again. And it looks like we're having technical difficulties in terms of like getting our end on TikTok, but yeah. So we're going to be reviewing a debate that occurred on Inspiring Philosophy's Discord between external from ImagoLogos and our friend Modern Atheism. On the problem of evil. And yeah, but before that, we'll introduce ourselves. So why don't we start with you, the Lamb?
Yeah, hello everyone. I am a starting Christian apologist on YouTube and TikTok, and I just do basically analytical continental philosophy, just dealing with any general philosophy in terms of theology.
Oh, I think you cut out. Yo, Lamb, you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Did I cut out?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think you cut out at the end.
Oh, I think that was it. I just said,
Okay.
yeah, the analytical and
All right.
theological philosophy. That's it.
Yeah, sure. I guess I can introduce myself next. I'll get an introduction in the debate, but I run ImagoLogos. I'm the one in the debate, and I guess I'm gonna be doing some projects on the problem, not the problem of evil, but the logical problem of the incarnation, and I have a couple of projects. I don't want to reveal them all right now, though.
Oh, I was muted. My bad. Yeah, we got a media over here saying "Salam alaikum." I'm the co-owner of ImagoLogos, so I guess ImagoLogos is interdenominational now.
Amber is
So
crazy. Wait,
yeah.
so do I own ImagoLogos or does Meaty own it?
I don't know. You tell me.
God damn, I forgot Loki.
Share screen. Croton tab. Yeah, we got a bunch of tabs to share. Inspiring Philosophy, Apologetics, Substack. We'll do the Lamb's YouTube over here. He has 2 videos on moral incoherency of Islam. And tell us about that debate, by the way, the Lamb, because you debated someone on the moral incoherency of Islam, didn't you?
Yeah, that
Yeah.
one was on the ImagoLogos channel, so you might have to check there.
Yeah, you can check it out. In short, it was I was debating someone who's like kind of a subsect of Shia Islam, so it was a little bit odd getting around that. But yeah, I've updated the argument since then. It was a little bit too long and meaty for like a short debate like that, but I still think it was like okay.
Gotcha. You know what? I'm just gonna share my whole window. Share. Media. So this is my channel, Apollos Christian Apologetics. We're dedicated to up-to-date Christian apologetics research with the most insightful and novel of research topics and discussions. We also have exclusive content that we're posting on Instagram, TikTok. ImagoLogos has their own YouTube channel, ran by several people. And yeah, you want to introduce yourself, External?
Oh yeah, so I run the channel. Obviously, we do a lot of stuff just on like apologetics and theology in general. The main people who will work on it is usually me, Cryptic, and Sam in terms of the videos. But in terms of the live streams, that's usually a little different.
Gotcha. And we also have Modern Atheism in the chat. Pleased to have you, Modern. External, do you count by vision?
Yeah, bro. We all count by vision, bro.
Yeah. Alright, but yeah, okay. I guess we can move on to overall thoughts about the debate. So yeah, this is one of those events that were hosted on the Inspiring Philosophy Discord. And we were able to see it live before it was ever uploaded to YouTube, and we got to interact with live Q&As. But I think my overall thoughts, and then you guys can go ahead, were that it was an interesting approach insofar that External didn't use any theodicies. He strictly stuck to the logical portion of the problem of evil, which, to be fair, he clarified that it's in context of like of Modern Atheism responding to his problem of evil video. But regardless, it is a different approach. I probably would have gone a different approach by actually incorporating like a theodicy at some point, at least for those people who are not so familiar with like all of these philosophical mumbo jumbo and logic and just honestly aren't familiar with the situation. But yeah, what are your overall thoughts, the Lamb, starting with you?
Yeah, I think like when you think about these different approaches when talking about something like the problem of evil, theodicies can help incorporate like a broader audience. But I do have a special place for the logical and philosophical breakdown of like the problem of evil structure, and I think External did a decent job at portraying the issues with like applying specific ontology or value to some like moral frameworks and making sure that the burden stuck onto the atheist for presenting that argument. So I thought he did a good job with that.
Alrighty, and then what are your overall thoughts about the debate? Whether it's Q&A, I know we all have thoughts about Q&A, but like opening slides, or whether it be like Modern Atheisms or yours, and then like the crossfire discussion.
I feel like for the openings, I did very well in the openings, in my opinion. I think that was definitely the most substantial part of the debate, from my part at least. As for open discussion, I feel like we didn't get to cover everything I wanted to, and I feel like it did stop a little bit too early. Maybe 60 minutes wasn't enough to really get where I was going, but I do think I still did well, even though we didn't really get to everything on my end. For Q&A, I think I did get to everything I wanted to get to in the Q&A. But I do still have some stuff left over, like material from the debate that I think we might want to go over.
Gotcha. Alright, yeah, let me go ahead and pull that up. Is there a specific slide you wanted me to pull up, by the way?
Well, do we want to go over the slides that I didn't go through right now, or do we want to go through them when they're relevant? Because we might want to wait.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's totally up to you. Let me just fix this TikTok. Title, remove TikTok from the stream. Bro, can I not change the thing mid? Okay, yeah, it looks like we aren't able to stream to TikTok, but it is what it is. It is what it is. Portrait, remove TikTok from stream. Yeah, okay. Oh, wait, no. I think we can fix it real quick here. Give me a second. Add new destination. RTMPS, stream key, TikTok. Oh, wait. TikTok. That's copied. Alright, yeah. Okay, and then, sorry, guys. Yeah, we're reviewing the inspiring philosophy debate on the problem of evil between external and modern atheism, who's also in the chat with us, just not in the panel right now. Um, never mind. Hello. Let's see here. Hello, brothers. My opinion, in my opinion, is that external can do a lot better, but he held his ground. Not gonna lie. Yeah, I agree with that. And so like it definitely is like a good rhetorical strategy to like make your opponent like try to prove their ethical framework. And realizes he is being mispronouncing Theodicy all the time. Me or someone else? Modern.
I actually don't think I mentioned Theodicy like in the debate at all until like this week.
Gotcha. Okay, Juan 6-7. I didn't prepare the opening very much, to be honest. Yeah, and we'll go over that. Hi. At some parts, it feels like we were going in circles a bit. What do you think? Yeah, we'll get to that for sure. You did better than external. Ooh, you gonna take that, external?
Who is that? Okay,
That was meaty.
That's Mozzie, bro. I'm not taking Mozzie seriously here.
Yeah. Should beliefs be based on evidence? Yes, absolutely. Mr. Zygoat says hi. Alright. And with that, yeah, let's go ahead and start this opening statement. So, yeah. Here we go. Let me know if you guys have any trouble hearing it. Theater mode, let's do that. Let's play it.
All right, so we'll kick it off to introductions here. Welcome to the Inspiring Philosophy Discord channel. Today we're going to be having a debate against Juan or Modern Atheism and External on the problem of evil. So we'll kick it off with External.
Let me know if you guys ever want to pause it.
Yeah, I'm an External. I run the ImagoLogos YouTube channel, and this debate I should probably explain. Basically, I did a debate on the problem of evil a year ago, and Modern saw it, and so he wanted to debate me on the same topic. And the opening I'm going to be giving tonight is going to be the same as a YouTube video I did a while ago called "The Problem of Evil Debunked: A New Solution." You may also know me because I'm somewhat active on here. So like, obviously I'm like Piers, Piers in the chat. He knows me. He's like my son and everything. So y'all probably know me. All right, I'll give the rest of my time for the introduction to Modern.
All right, and we'll kick it over to Modern.
Okay. Okay, so first of all, I would like to say thank you to External for agreeing to have this conversation, and thanks to IP for agreeing to host the debate, and also to you guys for thank you for having me here. You know, I'm a little bit active. Some of you may know me, we may have talked a little bit. Oh, I have a small YouTube channel. It's called Modern Atheism. So if you want to see IP getting debunked, check it out. I mean, just kidding. It's just some atheist stuff. Yeah, I think that's all.
All right. Before we get into the debate, I want to do some quick housekeeping items real quick. We are looking as a Discord channel to do more debates. So we are looking to keep up with more debates. So if you're interested in doing a debate and you have another interlocutor that is interested in doing a debate, please reach out to me and we can get something set up. After that, though, we should be good to kick it off. So I will give the...
Oh, yeah. At this point, I probably should mention that I'm looking to debate anyone who's willing to debate whether Jesus was a failed apocalyptic prophet on Inspiring Philosophy's Discord. But, yeah. Kalen says, what evidence do you have other than testimony? So today's stream is not a call-in stream. Today's stream is going to be solely based on the problem of evil, but there's many pieces of evidence from God's existence, just wholesale, that do not rely mostly on testimony. As far as like specific evidences for Christianity, I mean, like we have like the textual evidence that points to the preservation of the testimonial documents and certain archaeological finds, but as far as like not taking testimony as evidence, that's totally fallacious. Modern philosophers and epistemologists recognize that testimony is a form of evidence, empirical evidence, according to modern juries and courts. It's a form of empirical evidence, and furthermore, that it can be reliable, and there's ways to assess the reliability of testimony. Do you guys have anything other than that to add to this one comment about...
There's no point in focusing on it too much, but that's not even the topic of the video today.
Yeah, all
Yeah,
I
for
would
sure.
say is just read Lydia McGrew's work.
Based. All right, let's continue.
The format for the debate, we'll open up with 10-minute opening statements, and then it will kick off to a 60-minute of open discussion, and then after that, we'll have a Q&A session. For the Q&A session, I will give how that will work once we get to that point, but it will be you requesting up, and then I'll bring one person in on a time. I'll go over that again in a couple rules for the open discussion, but we should be good to go. I'll kick it over to External for his opening statement.
Actually, can I get permissions to share my screen, my opening? So I have permissions, I think.
Yeah, we need to do that.
Oh, yeah, I think I got it.
Okay.
All right, is it visible?
Yep.
Okay. So to start off, we're debating the problem of evil, and we can view the problem of evil as basically an argument which says that if God is all good, then he would wish to end all evil, and then from there we would go over how God is omnipotent, and so therefore he could do it. And since evil exists, therefore God cannot be good and omnipotent at the same time without resulting in a contradiction. And so this would provide a defeater for theism. Or you can obviously put in a premise by premise argument like this. So for example, modern atheism has said in the past that he can define the problem of evil as just one, Christianity posits God is benevolent, two, benevolence implies that unnecessary suffering would not be allowed, three, unnecessary suffering obtains, and then conclusion, there is no omnibenevolent being. Now, the way that I would go around this argument is that I would basically just deny the premise that being all good entails that he would wish to end all evil, such that the evil never existed at all. And for ease, I can just refer to this premise as the crucial premise. So if I refer to the crucial premise, I'm referring to this. And although not all problem of evil arguments are going to be the same as the one I gave above, all of them depend on the crucial premise in some way. And the reason why we can reject this crucial premise is because I think it depends on a moral framework, which is both contentious and unjustified. So for starters, we can just define a moral framework as a set of beliefs about morality. And the problem of evil is going to require a moral framework because the entire argument rests upon the claim that God being good ultimately leads to him ending all evil. And this is a claim about what a moral person should do given their goodness, and this requires beliefs about morality. So it requires a moral framework. This is important because
Now, of course, like in your debate external, you didn't give like specific moral frameworks, and you focused more on the logic instead. But I can think of a couple of like moral frameworks at the top of my head, like virtue ethics, and I guess like some form of like New Testament deontological ethics that would be in line with Christianity that would not necessarily entail the crucial premise. But do you want to expound on either of that? Either of you, external or the Lamb? Like different like types of moral frameworks that don't imply the crucial premise, because to some people it might seem like very obvious kind of premise you kind of want to assume in your ethical framework. So
Well, I go into like attempted justifications of the crucial premise, and actually go over the self-evidence response. If you go to, I can show you where I covered that actually. So slide 30 is one place where I cover that.
bed.
And then slide 33 onward. Slide 33 to 35 as well.
33 to 35 can intuition grant moral realism. Okay, got it. Did you want to say anything on these specific slides? This is 30, this is 33.
Uh-huh. Yeah. So usually a justification for the crucial premise is going to be like, well, for any moral agent, they're going to be obligated to stop evil, and we can know this just by like induction, and they're going to point to like examples where like someone is where like someone is in a situation where they can stop evil, but then they don't, right? And one response you could give to this is basically that difference in ontology or role can lead to a difference in obligation. So with God, we would just say there's a difference in obligation with him. So the way that he stops evil is going to be different from the way that we do it. Because the way that we would do it is we would do it directly as created moral agents. Whereas with God, that's an uncreated thing, which is going to be using created instruments to stop evil. And then another thing, if you go to slide 33, right? So usually you can also just argue that, well, if you're going to use self-evidence to argue for like that, you know, all good persons are going to stop evil such that it doesn't exist and that this extends to God. Well, basically, you're kind of just using a self-evidence or like intuition argument for your moral framework. But if intuition can be like used as a source for knowledge, then it seems like arbitrary to then use it for moral realism, but then not to use it for theism, because theism has also been shown to be intuitive. And someone can argue something like, okay, well, I find God intuitive, so why is it okay for you to assume that the crucial premise is true because it's self-evident, but then I can't say that God is also self-evident? And so there needs to be some form of like symmetry breaker to show why intuition can justify like a secular view of moral realism, but then not theism. Likewise, even if like you can justify that like morals exist through intuition in general, it doesn't follow that like the crucial premise itself is intuitive, because like a lot of people would also find certain theodicies to be intuitive, and yet they would deny the crucial premise in their intuition. So like, for example, someone might say, well, okay, maybe God allows evil because it's for like the greater good or something like that, right? Now I'm not saying I hold to that solution, but many people find it intuitive that that solution is correct. And so in that way their intuitions actually point against the crucial premise. And so there needs to be like a symmetry breaker trying to explain, how do you deal with the intuitions for the crucial premise and then the intuitions against it. And if one isn't provided, then I don't think you can really make an argument from your intuitions to the crucial premise. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see the sources that I was talking about for saying that theism is intuitive.
Gotcha. Lamb, you had anything to add regarding the crucial premise being denied under modern philosophical ethical frameworks?
Yeah, it would just be sort of a reiteration of how External explains this sort of an appeal to some sort of like foundationalism, in the sense that you say that your intuitions might be like self-evident, and therefore the crucial premise is going to be called into question, whatnot. Yeah, it would equally be applied to theism or any other sort of position you hold as a form of justification. So it's sort of just like a moot point.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Like, the crucial premise, whether or not it's true, doesn't entirely depend on theism. Yeah, that's definitely helpful to point out. But
I mean, if you go to the next slide, I actually do have another argument. So if you look at evolutionary debunking arguments, I think you can provide an evolutionary debunking argument against moral realism from a secular viewpoint. And because it's specifically from a secular viewpoint, it can't really be applied to theism, which means that a theistic moral foundation works. But then from a secular view, if you want to try and justify the crucial premise from a secular view rather than doing it internally, because that's one of the things I point out is that if the problem of evil is an internal critique, then you're going to have to use the moral view internal to Christianity. But then if it's an external critique, then you're going to have to justify it through something else. So intuition would be like an example of an external critique where you're saying, okay, well, I find it intuitive that the crucial premise is true. But if it's an external critique and you're trying to justify like a moral framework that doesn't require God, then I think you would just fall prey to this argument. Because if you're going to say that moral knowledge exists because our intuition, then the problem is that the mechanism, so like moral intuition, is only there from like a secular perspective because we evolved that way. But evolution would only have put it there to speak like anthropomorphically about it. But obviously, you don't have to think that. But just to, like for ease of communication, we can say that evolution put it there simply because it helps reproduction. The mechanism wouldn't be there necessarily to tell us about like what is true, but it's more so about how to increase reproduction and increase the survivability of the species. But why would survivability of the species be correlated to objective moral truth? And like basically, you would have to say that beliefs that are good for reproductions are also beliefs that are objectively true in terms of morality. But I see no reason to draw a correlation. In fact, that seems a bit ad hoc to like draw a correlation between the two. So like for like an example of this, if you said that theft is wrong and that you know this because you had an intuition for that, then the evolutionary processes which resulted in that intuition being there are only going to be there because it helps for reproduction, not because of like the actual truthfulness of the claim. So it seems that there's no correspondence between the truthfulness of moral claims and reproduction under a secular worldview. And so I wouldn't really see a reason or like a way that intuition could be able to justify moral realism from a secular view. And that's going to be important because then you can't really do an external critique of the problem of evil using where you use intuition to justify the crucial premise. Because if moral realism can't get off the ground using intuition, then I don't see how the crucial premise can get off the ground either. Because the crucial premise obviously requires some form of moral realism. And the reason why the internal critique doesn't work is, well, we'll see that in a bit.
alrighty, let's continue with this video. Remove this, add this. Let's go.
the problem of evil does not work under all moral frameworks. And so what this means is that modern atheism has to present a defendable moral framework that works with the problem of evil and is epistemically justified. So for example, right, suppose for a second that this system of thought is true, that being 1, God exists, 2, the only immoral things are four-sided triangles, 3, there are no four-sided triangles. So obviously this system isn't actually true, but just for hypothetical assume it is. So this is going to be a possible moral framework. But under this moral framework, the problem of evil doesn't work because obviously there's no evil under this scenario. And so because of that, the problem of evil fails. Likewise, suppose another moral framework where the propositions you accept are 1, God exists, 2, an all good being doesn't have to prevent all evils in the case that all triangles are three-sided, 3, all triangles are three-sided, 4, evil happens. Now under this moral framework, because we have a set of premises or a set of propositions which does not entail that God would end all evil, therefore the problem of evil does not work. So under this moral framework, the problem of evil fails. And obviously I'm not going to say this moral framework specifically is true, but what this does show is that modern atheism needs to provide a moral framework which actually works with the problem of evil. However, even if he does provide such a moral framework, he needs to actually provide a moral framework which is justifiable. So for example, if he says that an all good being would stop evil if three-sided triangles exist, that's going to be a claim that he needs to epistemically justify. And so even if he can say the problem of evil works under this system, he would need to epistemically justify that moral paradigm. And I think that's going to be the important part, because when he chooses which moral framework that works, he needs to either go with the problem of evil being an internal critique or an external critique. And depending on which he chooses, the issue can change. So if it's an internal critique, then he needs to basically show that something in Christianity entails that the problem of evil works, or that it entails the crucial premise. Because what it would mean is that in an internal critique, you would basically be taking upon your opponent's worldview and then showing an entailment from that. So if he wants to go with the internal critique, which most atheists do, and most atheists frame the problem of evil as an internal critique, he needs to demonstrate that something in Christianity entails that the problem of evil can work. And so that's going to place the burden of proof on him. Likewise, if he wants to do an external critique, then he's going to have to find a moral framework that is both epistemically justified and compatible with the problem of evil. And that's going to have to be a secular framework. That's important because whichever way he goes, the burden of proof is upon him, meaning that he has to justify it epistemically, which means I really do not have to do much epistemically for my argument to go through. Now, obviously, I explained what an internal critique is, and obviously the problem of evil is an internal critique. So from this so far, like what I've addressed is that since the problem of evil relies upon the crucial premise, and the crucial premise relies upon a moral framework, and that moral framework can either be situated as something internal or external to Christianity, we can conclude that since the problem of evil is an internal critique, and that moral framework is going to be internal, that if the Christian moral framework denies that an all good being would stop all evil, that being it denies the crucial premise, then it follows that the problem of evil fails. And, we can just obviously see that the Christian worldview denies that the crucial premise is true. So obviously, for example, we would affirm that God is all good. But then when we get to biblical passages about whether or not, like, for example, God should stop all evil instantly such that it never exists, this problem of evil is addressed, and it's directly stated that the crucial premise is false. And so from this, we can infer that, the biblical texts, which are going to be the source for our knowledge about what Christian theism states, and thus our knowledge for about what is internal to the Christian paradigm, is going to basically tell us that, hey, the crucial premise isn't justified. And likewise, you see this in Matthew as well, not just the Old Testament. Now, this is going to be important because, as I've stated before, if the problem of evil depends upon the crucial premise, and the crucial premise needs to be dependent upon Christianity justifying it, then it follows that since Christianity does not justify, the problem of evil fails. Now, let's just say that modern atheism wants to make it an external critique, right? So, for example, here he says that the Christian standard of what goodness is divorced from the typical definition, right? So he says it here as well. Well, first of all, to argue that the Christian moral framework is wrong in the way that he's doing it is just forfeiting it being an internal critique, and that's important because then he has to justify his own moral framework, which means that once again the burden of proof is upon him. And for example, even if he gives a moral framework, if it's not justified, then really we can dismiss it for the reason it's not justified. So for example, if I say people who prefer pens to pencils are bad according to my beliefs, and Bob, if Bob is all good, he would prefer pens to pencils, that doesn't really matter in proving that Bob is not all good, because obviously that's just my subjective standard, and there's no real backing to that epistemically. So because there's no backing to it, I can just dismiss it as basically being subjective.
All right, you want to
and that's going to be
stop
important
it there
because
real
modern
quick?
atheism wants to bring up a moral framework that he holds to. If he can't just
So this also applies to like a subjective view, which is why I say you need moral realism to run the problem of evil. Because let's say you have some like subjective view of morality where it's just dependent on people's stances, right? So under a subjective view of morality, if you wanted to run an external critique with the problem of evil, you would have to basically say that, okay, well, according to this standard of morality, God would be in the wrong for not preventing evil, right? But then I can just say, okay, well, I have my own or different standard of morality, or like God has his own stance dependent view of morality by which he's actually okay with it. And since it would be subjective, I don't see how you could argue against that. I'm pretty sure, I remember Faith Because of Reason actually used that kind of response. Because I don't, he doesn't hold to moral realism. So when someone presented him with the problem of evil, he actually just said, "Yeah, well, I reject stance independent morality, so I don't think the problem of evil works." And I'm pretty sure the other guy just didn't really, he wasn't able to like go with the problem of evil after that.
Yeah, for sure. I'm one of those guys who thinks that objective or objective morality, I think just morality in general is just better indicated by the existence of God than if atheism were true. It's better predicted under the theistic paradigm, because under naturalism, it's like you said, like it's a totally, for a lack of a better term, unguided process that's only constrained by the natural world's physical constants. But if you have like some sort of like axiological expectation mismatch problem, shout out to Tim Howard, then it's better resolved especially if you believe in like a theistic paradigm, because all of a sudden like life becomes worth living, and the scope of morality becomes eternal, and so on and so forth. But yeah, Lamb, did you have anything to add to anything that was said so far?
Yeah. basically, when we talk about these sorts of moral frameworks under whatever sort of paradigm is being portrayed, the problem of evil is typically going to be against the Christian paradigm that is like perfect being theism. And the issue is, if it's not an internal critique and it's an external critique, you have to apply a moral framework that is going to work within the system of perfect being theism in order to arise some contradiction or arise some like improbability of actually having like omnibenevolent traits. And the issue with that is a lot of people who use the problem of evil most likely are not moral realists. And so, like External had mentioned, this will end up falling into some sort of collapse because it's just going to appeal to certain preferences, and that doesn't actually cause any innate issues or contradictions within perfect being theism.
For sure, for sure. Alright, let's get back to the video. Alright, share this, Chrome tab, Inspiring Philosophy Discord, and let's continue.
Justify, then there's no way that he can actually use it as a way to help prove the problem of evil goes through. So another thing is that modern atheism talks about how we're divorcing the word benevolent from how it's typically used. I would disagree because I think benevolence refers to something being all good. So if God is all good in our paradigm, then obviously there's no issue with us using the term benevolent. Furthermore, we would have to discern what benevolence means typically. And I think the way we would determine what certain concepts refer to is we would begin by looking at particulars and then abstracting to the universal. So for example, right, if you want to know what the concept of water refers to, you would look at particular bodies of water and then see what properties individuate that water from other types of things such as rocks or trees. You wouldn't just discern it by looking at the colloquial understanding of the term. There's a distinction between how we understand a term and what the term actually refers to. So for example, water refers to
just gonna quickly address this over here, where atheism doesn't exist. It's just a word for not believing in something. Well, by that definition, there's no reason for us to convert to atheism proper, as in not believing in any gods. Because if it's just a lack of belief, quote unquote, I don't really think like lack of a belief is the best way to characterize a psychological disposition to a true or false claim. Anyway, there's no reason to like convert to atheism proper if you're just going to redefine atheism to be a lack of belief in a god, because by that definition Christians are atheists, which interestingly enough is a accusation you get in like the ancient Roman Empire, where Christians were called atheists with respect to the polytheistic Roman pantheon. But anyway, there's that. Alright, let's continue with the video.
H2O, but the standard understanding of water in ancient Greece was that it was an element. So the term was commonly understood as an element, even though the actual referent of that term wasn't an element, showing that the common definition doesn't actually correspond to what the term actually refers to. And that's going to be important because if we're going to try to discern the meaning of benevolent or omnibenevolent, we would have to abstract from examples of things that are benevolent or omnibenevolent. So if you want to abstract to what a omnibenevolent thing would look like, you would have to have an example of something that's omnibenevolent, but that would require theism. So I don't think you can really get off the ground what the classical meaning or typical meaning of omnibenevolent is. I think I'll concede my time. I think I've said what I need to.
Okay. All right. We will now kick it over to Modern Atheism for his 10-minute opening statement. All right. Do you have any presentation to share?
Oh, no, I had just what I'm going to say.
Okay. All right. And then I'll kick it over to you, and your time will start now.
Okay, so I think to begin with is...
Real quick, I think he had some technical difficulties. Did you skip that, External, or do I have to skip it?
Yeah, so I should probably explain. Basically, like there was like a 5-minute period where modern atheism like couldn't get his mic working, so like I kind of just cut it out and then started again, whereas the opening actually started.
Okay, bad. So we can continue.
Yeah, because I didn't really want to
distinction between
part.
the logical problem of evil and the probabilistic problem of evil, which is a more modest argument, and just basically the attempts to say that the suffering is unexpected under the hypothesis of theism, and suffering is not that unexpected under the hypothesis of atheism. So in general terms, the existence of suffering is more likely. It makes things more unlikely. And so I want to start with a story. And I saw this in Facebook, and it's one of those videos that one of those video ads that ask for money. And I apologize beforehand if this is like shocking or sensitive to someone. I'm gonna try to not make it super horrible, but it was a video of a little girl who was born with some kind of genetic disease, and she had it was a baby like 2 or 3 years old. She had like blisters all over the body, and they were like really, really bad. They had to change the bandage each day, and they had to her treatment cost a lot of money. It was very hard to watch. The sad part is that they are telling us about how she's...
Yeah, just a real quick comment over here. A lot of atheists do this, where like the descriptors of evil become the central point of focus in terms of like gratuitous evil existing in the world, when it could just be simply summed up as gratuitous evil. And I'm not saying that modern atheism is doing this in particular, but it is the case that what you'll find in a lot of these problem of evil debates is that the atheist goes to describe in horrific detail some sort of gratuitous evil to evoke some sort of like emotional response or like some sympathy or empathy for us to relate to the victim or uh, think like something is really bad about the situation. When in fact the point of contention is just simply logically can it coexist with God? But yeah, do you guys have any thoughts about like that tactic? I don't think it's necessarily dishonest or anything like that. Um, I think rhetoric is fair game, um, for any debate anyway. So, like that's definitely something I have to work on, rhetoric. But what do you guys think?
I think it's mainly a rhetorical device.
Yeah, agreed.
Gotcha. Cool. Modern, who is also in the chat, says taking too much bandwidth the video. But I even bought faster internet for these kind of things. Nice. Yeah, I recommend gigabit, but I'm not sure what's available in Germany. I knew you would say something like that. Yeah, it is a Christian apologetics channel, so yeah, we have to do anything to be biased towards our worldview and justify it at all costs. So, all right, yeah, let's continue.
She lives with so much pain. She's constantly in pain, and you can see her. She's scratching her. She scratches constantly. Like, it's really sad because you can tell she lives in a constant state of discomfort, right? If you imagine how a baby or a normal toddler lives, like they wake up, they eat something, they play with toys, right? But that girl, life wasn't like that, right? Life was a constant state of constant pain, constant discomfort, right? Constant problems, and she's gonna wake up to that tomorrow, and the entire day will be like that, and the day after as well. And she's probably not going to make it, right? She's gonna be a very hard life. So, and what you have to ask yourself is like, couldn't God just make the human body in such a way, like the DNA, that at least this wouldn't happen, like to this degree, this wouldn't happen, right? And you have to ask yourself, like, why did God want like this specific kind of things, right? So that's something called the evidential problem of evil. Or somebody, like, people will say, oh, that's just I'm appeal to emotion or the emotional aspect of you. But I think this has some, at least rhetorically, right? There is some persuasive force there. Okay, so what is the logical? What was the issue with God? The issue is very simple. The idea is that God is posited to be a benevolent being, a maximally benevolent and maximally loving being. And well, from that, I think the critique is straightforward, right? To say, okay, a benevolent being wouldn't want to cause suffering, right? One could argue, well, he will allow suffering, but I think he wouldn't want to. I think the case, for example, in the case of genetic diseases, it's not just allowing for suffering, that he's actively causing suffering. And yeah, I think for that reason, I think the argument is more persuasive as the problem of suffering instead of the problem of evil. Because evil sounds like something that humans choose to do, and we can talk about that later. So, I think you most of you have already heard the logical argument, like the syllogism, like, oh, if God is omnipotent, he's able to stop evil. If God is omniscient, he knows about evil, right? There are some weird people that posit a limited God, such as he's not able to stop evil. I think the external doesn't have that position. That's a minority position. Most Christians,
I think the limit here that that would cause God not to like intervene in these certain scenarios would actually be something that's in line of his nature. So one of the theodicies for God not intervening is actually the need for natural laws. If God was intervening all the time, there would be no way to reliably predict anything happening in the universe to where we can develop anything like scientific natural laws. Now, of course, there's like some other responses to that too, like say for example, couldn't he just make it in such a way that it wouldn't be detectable and yet we could develop those natural laws? But in any case, what I'm just trying to describe bare bones is that these constraints would be in accordance with his nature, and we would say as classical theists that whenever we say God is good, it's more of like an analogical descriptor, and good, and as external we'll go on later to say that reverts to not a different moral framework, but something that is contextualized by God's nature, namely his omniscience and his omnipotence, and so he would be forced to act in a different way in order to be in accordance with his nature. I mean, like, if we knew like the possibilities from start to finish, we would definitely want to make sure everything plays out perfectly. So do you guys want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I do go over this in a slide. We can pull it up right now, need be. It's oh well, we already pulled it up, the part about how difference in role can cause a difference in obligation, which goes in hand with
Yeah, ethical contextualism.
Uh-huh. You could also go over there's slide 23, which goes over how we would predicate things like desire and like analogical predication.
Yeah, for sure.
Alpha
Anything to
needs
point out?
Also, Alpha needs a diet says oh, I can't show it on the stage, but he
What?
says
This opening was not very strong.
Is he referring to modern atheisms or mine? I assume.
When I first saw the comment, Modern Atheism started speaking, but he could also be referring to you, so I'm not sure.
No, I think he's referring to Modern Atheism because I know who that is. He told me, and he said it earlier that he thought my opening was stronger.
Gotcha. Cool. All right. I guess we can continue with the video. That and then that.
Oh yeah, that is the slide. The does God desire the end of evil? So basically, whenever we predicate things about God, we would be speaking usually like whenever we speak about desire specifically, we'd have to say that they apply analogically, not properly, because God does not have passions properly. So when we say like God is angry, right? That the word anger is going to be applied analogically to God to describe like the moral attitude God has to murder or something like that, right? So when we say God desires the end of evil, the desire is going to be predicated in virtue of an action that God takes, right? So in this case, the action would be the end of evil. It's just the way in which he does that is through created moral agents and is done over time. And this kind of gets into like soul building or like narrative theodicies. Like you can very easily connect it to those two. It's like I know Fan may like something like that, or like Tim Howard may like a view like that. And so, because of this, our view on how God desires the end of evil doesn't necessarily entail like the crucial premise, basically. And you'll see the slide come up in the debate too. So I don't want to focus
Yeah.
on it.
Yeah, no worries. I'll pull that up real quick. Oh shoot. Remove this, add this, and start.
For most of these debates, the crucial premise is an omnibenevolent being, where he desire to stop all evil, But I would say at least minimize suffering. And again, I think from the definition of benevolent, I think the answer is straightforward. I think the answer is yes. So by looking at the world, I would say, yeah, I think then it's not the case that there is an omnibenevolent, maximally loving deity. With dominance over all of creation, who set up this state of affairs, right? That's what I would say. And yeah, okay, Sten also brought some of the things I said earlier. And yeah, like he said, this all began because we were talking about the debate he had. And I hope this debate is just not based around the definition of benevolent, whether it's valid for Christianity to define benevolent in such a way that I think it's like ultimately I don't know what he's going to say. I don't want to put words in his mind, but it's like they say, okay, the word good, when we say God is good, it's just the good is like what his own nature says or something like that. It's something that sounds a bit weird to me. But I don't know. I think he also had another debate with some orbital guy. And when he also brought up Theodicy, and I think this is an important aspect of the debate, and I don't want to tell him how to make this debate, it's up to him, but I would also find it interesting to discuss the issue of Theodicy. And does he think that we don't really need one? Because he didn't use one. He didn't use any of them in his opening, which is a bit strange, right, for an opening on the problem. I think the vast majority of people appeal to some Theodicy. I think that would be interesting to discuss that, but obviously I want to discuss the main issue, which is the conversation we had about what I was saying is that the way you define benevolence is everyone understands something, this to mean something, right? And you cannot say, Christianity defines benevolence in a way that is completely different from the normal way people understand the word, right? If the normal definition of benevolence, the way the normal language is used, if it implies that this being wouldn't cause or allow suffering, then this is the definition we should use. And this is the last point. He's saying that this is an internal critique, or okay, what if I say that it is not an internal critique of Christianity? Because then we will have to look at the verses, which verse in particular says that God is all good. What does that word mean in this context? It will get very complex. I would just say it's an internal critique of classical theism. Because in classical theism, in general, God is defined as a maximally benevolent, all loving, and all of that. So from the word, and that word is not linked to any particular Bible verse or any particular theological context, what the word should say. So it's just the basic definition of benevolent or loving. What does that entail? And I think it's straightforward to say that entails.
Hey Roken, we actually have another video that's running concurrently with this one that is horizontal, so it's both vertical and horizontal, so yeah.
That you will not cause other beings to suffer for no good reason, right? And this is the key premise, because now with the way taste normally challenge, this is okay, God has a good reason, and this particular theory, so this other reason, right? Then we go to Theodicy, but I don't know if he's going to appeal to that, or so yeah, I think I will just see what he says, right? But that's all.
I mean, by the way, you might
Sorry,
want
I
to
was muted. All right,
So funny enough, I do get into like the typical meaning of what the word benevolent means in my opening, and I get into it later. Do we want to like cover that now, or do we want to like wait until that comes up?
Sorry, say that again.
So like the whole point about like what the word benevolent typically means, I bring it up in my opening, but then I also bring it up later on. Do we want to talk about it now, or do we want to wait?
Yeah, we can talk about it briefly. And then whenever it passes, you can like just say, "Hey, we talked about that." So
it's on like slide 29, because if the entire contention is just that like the term benevolence refers to something regularly, Well, I think the issue is that he's going off of like what his or like what he thinks the standard understanding of the term benevolence is. But we need to distinguish between what the understanding of the term is and what the term actually refers to. So I get into this in my opening, right? But if water refers to H2O, but the standard understanding of the term water is that it refers to an element. So like in ancient Greece, people understood the term water as referring to an element. That doesn't mean that the term water would therefore refer to an element. No, they would just be wrong. And so the act, like what the term refers to, is different from like how people typically understand it. So even if like people typically understand benevolence to mean this or that, it wouldn't follow that therefore that's what the term benevolence refers to. In order to know what the term benevolence refers to, I think you would need some form of like moral framework, because benevolence implies some form of goodness, and knowing what goodness is or what goodness means requires some like moral view, which I think the issue is that I don't really feel I feel like modern atheism didn't really justify his moral view. So if he's gonna bring in a moral view or like bring in a term that requires a moral view, I feel like you would have to justify a moral view.
Yeah, there's also an issue which was this is very axiologically predicated, in which he's asserting a specific value onto a set of semantics in which he's referencing omnibenevolence. Um, and it's a little bit difficult to understand whether this is like some sort of lexical meaning or if he's making some distinction between like a semantic or pragmatic property. And that's sort of his burden to actually make that distinction. Otherwise, external really couldn't follow with that.
As
Gotcha.
for the
And
question, yeah, as for the
yeah,
question, I think the whether or not you can extrapolate from examples of benevolent beings to an omnibenevolent one, I think that would require. I think that depends on how you view morality, because if it's like some like depending on what your meta ethical view is. Let's say if you take some form of like I don't know, like a subjective morals, right? Where morality is dependent upon, let's say, culture, right? So some form of cultural relativism. Then I don't think you could do that.
gotcha. Yeah. And then yeah, I think that moral realism is, in my position, just to sum it up, is like it's conceivable, but it's not probable, because like how would we know what the objective omni is if we don't have any like meta ethical
Well,
like sort of like guardrails? So
I do think moral realism is correct and justifiable. It's just I don't think it's justifiable without also conceding to some form of theism.
yeah. And then he says, weren't they wrong when they weren't wrong when they said water is an element. The word element for them means something like substance, so in that sense they were right.
The issue is that I'm pretty sure the view when they said element, they meant it as something fundamental that like other things were made up of. I mean, either way though, like, but let's just say, for instance, that you're right and that they didn't actually think that. Suppose in a hypothetical society where people just believed like water was an element, and so they thought the term water referred to an element. But if that hypothetical scenario was true, then my point would still stand, because just that hypothetical scenario alone kind of shows that we affix the meaning of terms based off of what they refer to, not necessarily on like colloquial understanding, which is kind of my point. Regardless, I still think that the ancient Greeks would have been wrong about what H2O referred to, and so the example I gave was sufficient.
Gotcha. Alright, let's continue on with this stream.
Okay, have my timer set up here. We're gonna kick it over to 60 minutes of open discussion. For the open discussion, I'm gonna try to be as hands off as possible. If I see the topics getting a little bit off track, I might steer it back onto the right plane. But other than that, you guys should be free to go at it. I think I'm not sure how you guys want to do the open discussion. If you just want to start talking or add a little bit more structure to it.
Yeah, it's fine for me. We can just go to open discussion.
Yeah, that works.
All right, and I'll start the timer now.
Okay.
Modern, do you want to kick off the discussion or should I do it?
Yeah, no, let me just ask you something. Now, we can really talk about that issue, very interesting philosophical issue of the definition of benevolence and how does that work in internal critique. But let me ask you this. Don't you think that the problem or evil needs a theodicy? Don't you really require a theodicy to truly respond to that?
if you look at my solution, you could maybe call it like a theodicy because it's like a solution to the problem of evil. If you think that any solution to the problem of evil is a theodicy, then I guess you would need a theodicy in that sense. But if by theodicy you mean that like I need a causal account as to like or like the reasons why God doesn't prevent evil, then I don't think you need a theodicy in that sense to solve the problem of evil because I don't think that you need necessarily like a metaphysical account or like a causal principle to like explain why God does or does not do things. And like even in normal life, for example, if you were to, let's say, for example, look up to the sky and see that the sky is blue, you could know that the sky is blue without knowing the
Do you
causal
want
or like
to
metaphysical
pause
reasons
it
behind it.
here
And so likewise, I can say that God.
to like answer that question? Because the thing is that I mean, yeah, we colloquially define water. Well, first of all, the thing is, I think we do like in many. It depends on like how you would view what a colloquial definition is, because I think most people would define water as H2O. So, I mean, I know in the debate I said that fine, maybe water isn't colloquially defined as H2O, which because like that wasn't really my point. Because later on in the open discussion, um, we talked about whether or not H2O was the colloquial definition of water. I don't think that's necessarily required for my point, because my point is just that like whatever people refer to water as, like their understanding of the term doesn't dictate what it actually means. Regardless, I think most people, if you ask them to define water, they might actually just say H2O. That's kind of the issue. Regardless, even if like the thing is in their definition of water, they would have included that water was like an element or that water was fundamental, because that was something that was pretty well known back then. So I do think they had an incorrect. It's like the typical or like normal understanding of the word water was incorrect back then, and that's kind of the issue. Oh, he said that H2O is the technical or scientific. I mean, yeah, I can agree with that, but also the technical and scientific definition has become so well known that if it isn't the colloquial definition already, it might become it very soon.
Yeah, and again, this seems like a problem I see that's pretty prevalent with the problem of evil is the issue of applying some sort of like lexical meaning or any sort of semantic distinction, trying to express a property. And the issue is they're appealing to more of a colloquial or culturally dependent sort of understanding of a property when they start to say like, well, the semantics refer to something. Same with like how External was explaining the water. It could be the case that maybe they were talking about like an actual scientific understanding, even though that's unlikely. But that doesn't necessitate that the actual reference to the specific property of water is what's true given those semantics. That's something you kind of have to like prove yourself when you're applying this framework in the problem of evil.
Yes, sir. All right, let's continue.
God has like reasons for preventing or for not preventing evil or something akin to that without actually having like an in-depth explanation. Just like how like, if the sky is blue, I don't have to know that the reason why it's blue is because photons are scattered in a certain way causing me to see blue. Like that's not necessary for me to know just the fact that it is blue. So I think there's a difference between like giving a causal account and like just having knowledge of something.
Right. So here's the issue. I think, okay, if we know 100% that God exists, right? If we are sure about this, if established, then it follows maybe, okay, sure, then he must have a reason for allowing evil. I will agree to that. I will agree to that. But if the issue is a different, if it's a different, issue. Oh,
you cut out first.
Oh, I cut off first.
Yeah, you cut out for a second.
Oh. Okay, I don't know. Do you hear what I say? I mean, if we know. Well,
repeat what you said after if we know that God exists for 100%.
Okay, yeah. If we know for sure that a God exists, right? Then it follows, right? He must have a reason for allowing evil, right? That's true. But if it's the case, oh my God, are you getting me? Audio technical issues today. That's so sad.
I hear you.
Okay, that's right. I saw you made. Okay, so but if it's the case, in this case, we are discussing whether he exists or not. So okay, we don't know if God exists or not. We are going to evaluate that. We're going to look. Okay, suffering exists in the world. Now, you have two possibilities. One, is it because God, the traditional God, doesn't exist, and that's why accounts for suffering? Or number two, is it because God does exist, and he has a good reason to allow this, right?
Well, if we're evaluating the hypothesis of like we're going to be evaluating the hypothesis of Christianity, right? Or like because I know you said something. I know you said that like you wouldn't want to say it's an internal critique of classical theism, but the issue is that I would just ask classical theism and what moral framework, right? So if we're going to be evaluating a hypothesis and seeing whether like or not evil is expected under the hypothesis, we would have to know what type of moral framework that hypothesis takes. So like if you want to say that like you're trying to compare, what is more expected under theism versus atheism, I need to know what moral framework you're using to evaluate each.
I think if we're going to evaluate that, we will have to look. Okay, what are the hypothetical attributes of this God, we have to start with that because we don't know what his attributes are. We cannot predict is he going to allow suffering or not. So we will look, okay, a God with that attribute of benevolence, and we just ask, okay, from the way the word benevolence is used in everyday normal language, does benevolence imply that you're going to cause suffering, right? Extreme suffering, for example. I think the answer is no. And by the way, I have something to say about this moral framework thing, okay? Your opening kind of implies I will have to demonstrate or justify my moral framework to later appeal to that moral framework and say, okay, suffering is bad. But I'm not sure I agree. Even if two of us have different moral frameworks, we don't have to agree on everything. We don't have to agree like is divorce wrong or anything. As long as we both agree that a 3-year-old baby suffering all day is a bad thing, right? And I think this is not I think this is something that's going to be agreed on by the vast majority of different moral frameworks. I think as long as we agree to that, then I can make the argument for suffering. We don't have to have a more the same. We have to agree. We don't have to have the same moral framework. So I don't have to put my particular moral framework.
Well, the issue is that, so with you, if you could say that, right, and I can agree, but the question is whether or not you're justified. Because if you're going to be making an argument, then the premises of that argument have to actually be justified. So whenever we agree on something, right, I can say we agree on that fact, but that doesn't make your belief in that actually like justified. So when, for example, right, you're talking about, well, hold on, you're saying it's an internal critique, right?
Let's say yes. I think let's say yes. I mean, yeah.
When you say it's an internal critique of classical theism, doesn't that mean you have to?
Because I think this is a point that we kind of got stuck on a bit. Because one of my points was that, yeah, we can agree that suffering is bad. The issue is just like, can you be justified in it? So, like, for example, right? Let's say an atheist is an atheist because, like, they might think, well, if God is real, then like, why can't theists answer the question of if God is all powerful, can he create a rock so big that he can't lift it, right? So I think we would all agree that's like a bad justification for being an atheist. And yet both that atheist and modern atheism would agree on atheism. And yet I think clearly one is more justified in their atheism than like the other. And so the point I was trying to make here is that like, yeah, I can agree that like what's it called? That suffering is bad, but I don't think modern atheism can be justified in believing that from his point of view. So the question is more so about like epistemic justification.
For sure, for sure.
To take on the classical theist moral view.
I mean, but the way, yeah, I saw what you did in the debate with that atheist guy, and it's like you have to. It was something like, okay, you're making an internal critique. You have to assume that the worldview is true, but because it's true, then your argument is false. I think you did something like that. I just have to. I mean, the argument is very straightforward. Classical team says God is benevolent, right? Does that imply that he's going to cause a state of such severe suffering like this genetic disease? I think the answer is no. So I think you need a reason for that. I know that, but I think they have to go and say, hey, they just leave it like that. They have to go and say, okay, he has certain reasons for that, right? I think you have to do that, but you haven't agreed to that.
Okay. Here's the issue, though. When you're saying that benevolence implies certain things, right? If you're doing that internally to like a Christian paradigm, then you're going to be assuming our morals. And well, first of all, I would also say that like you're kind of also strawmanning how we view God's like causation in the world, because we wouldn't say that God is the cause of that person having the disease. We can say that like God isn't directly stopping that person from having the disease, but that's going to be different from saying that God is directly the cause. So I would say it's more in line with saying God doesn't directly stop it. It's just that what's it called? If you're assuming our framework, then you would have to concede that God not stopping that person from having that disease isn't actually immoral, because in our framework, there's nothing that causes it to be immoral for God not to do that.
Yeah, here's what I have some issues, and this will get us to. Okay, so in your framework, I think it will be immoral to cause suffering like that to a human being. I think it will be, for example, I think we both agree it will be immoral for a person to do it, right? And then you're telling me, but our framework says that God cannot be immoral. You haven't really explained that. Our framework says that God cannot be immoral, like no matter what he does, right? Even if he's torturing people for fun and for no greater good, and he does it forever. Like some people, I don't know if this is your view, but some people have this view, like God cannot be bad, morally bad by definition, right? Like, this is like missing the point somehow. The point is that you're saying that God is benevolent, and this word implies something. When you say God is benevolent, this implies something. The word means something for according to the way normal language is used, right? And what it implies, it usually implies that it wouldn't cause suffering. Oh, by the way, about causing or allowing, no, I cannot grant you that God allows the genetic diseases instead of causing them. I think because he set up our DNA and the way the human body works, and he created viruses and bacteria, I think he will be directly causing those things.
Well, there's a difference between having the human body be susceptible to those things and God directly causing it to be that way. Like, for example, right, if I were to cause something into existence and it has the possibility or like susceptibility to go bad, right, that doesn't mean I'm causing it insofar as it's bad. So like with us in our worldview, we would say that God created, like for example, Adam and Eve, and they wouldn't succumb to those types of issues. But then once they got kicked out of the garden, they would no longer have the immortality that they had in the garden.
Right. Okay, what I would say to that is that no, God is not just that something. It doesn't really work like in the real world. It's like they had some immortality and they were off, and then we get sick. No, God has to actively create viruses. God has to actively create bacteria. God has to actively program this disease in the DNA.
I'm not a younger creationist, so I would hold to evolution. So I wouldn't say that God actively creates those things in the way that you would say, or in the way that you're implying.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, I know, but he actually designed the system so that it would work in this way. And no, I don't see by the way you say that there is a difference between allowing, having a body with the possibility that it will go bad. I think if you do it on purpose, right, I'm going to put on purpose the possibility of this body going bad when it didn't have to have the possibility. I think that this is also the same, like morally blameworthy also in a sense. I think God will have to do that.
Well, I mean, when you say that they wouldn't have to have a body that's like how are you exactly justifying? Like, I'm confused kind of where you're going with that. Like, how are you justifying that claim?
So, justifying what exactly? What do you mean by that exactly?
Because you're saying that he wouldn't like have to do a body, or like that there's no reason for him to design humans to have a body in that way. Like if this is an internal critique and you're going to be taking upon our like framework, right? Then obviously we would think that God has some reasons for designing us with like a physical appearance rather than just being like souls. So when you say that there's no reason, to me that seems kind of question begging.
No, yeah, I agree. He will design a body. A body is okay, but why a body that can get genetic mistakes, right? Why design the mechanism, the genetic coping mechanism in a way that mistakes are possible? I think it is controversial to say that God could have made it so that this kind of mistakes didn't happen.
You might want to pause that one.
And you know, he would have like, you know, I know some Christians say, I don't know exactly.
Comment. Because we're watching it at
I think two times.
Yeah, we're watching it at 2 times because, well, do we want to skip the Q&A? Because if you want, like, the actual debate is only like an hour long. It's the Q&A that's actually the longest part, I think.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we'll definitely skip like the latter portion of like the Q&A, and then like, I mean, people can view.
Yeah, I think the best parts of the Q&A were the ones where Than came up, and I think with Than and Frulis. That definitely like that was a good part.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, with your part, Apollos, I think you were there for long enough because you were like in a car, right?
Yeah, I was on a bus, on my way back to my home city. So, home for the holidays, boys.
Yeah.
Also, just to say something about this part, this is where I feel like a lot of the debate is going to be at. Is there's like this circularity of like talking about how these semantics are applied, and then like which positions do these like moral frameworks apply. And I think they're kind of talking past each other right now, because like modern atheism is focusing on like some sort of expectation of reasoning that God would have to do something based on desire, and external is not really like focusing on that right now.
Yeah. Also, modern atheism said that you made him look dumb. So.
No.
I think one of the things is that like I came in here more thinking about like how would you logically defeat my mindset when it comes to the problem of evil is more so, you know, how do you just defeat the problem of evil as in like showing its premises are false, not really how do you provide a theistic account as to how evil functions in the like theistic paradigm, because I think those are 2 different questions. Providing an account of like how evil is meant to function versus just having a defeater for the problem of evil. I think those are 2 different things.
Yeah, and then ultimately there just needs to be some sort of justification for the understanding of how these semantics are applied to benevolence, and I have yet to see that from modern atheists thus far. And referring to memory, I don't think it actually does get resolved. I don't think there is justification for that use of like benevolence.
For sure.
What are you saying? Because you see, on one hand you point to evolution, and then on the other hand you say, okay, Adam and Eve had a perfect body, and after the sin is why it went imperfect. But I'm not sure, like, how do you harmonize those 2 views? I don't know.
Well, firstly, I would say that like when you're asking for, like, are you asking me for what the reason is specifically, or are you asking me for the justification I have for believing there is a reason? Because I think that's like, I think those are 2 different questions.
Yeah, I think my question is, I mean, do you think you need to appeal to a theory, or do you think it's enough to say God may have a reason that we don't know about it, right? Because that's
I'm fine with, like, for example, with the whole like bodies thing. Like, I don't know the exact reason as to why God designed this or that thing in the particular way it exists. I wouldn't claim to have knowledge on that, but that's not the same thing as saying that there's no like reason behind it. And this is important because once again, if you're taking upon our framework to do an internal critique, then you're going to have to basically concede that God has a reason, even if that reason isn't known.
All right, but that's saying that's what I say that you did in the other debate. And then I will never be able, nobody will never be able to make an internal critique in that way, because obviously your worldview entails that your worldview is true, right? I mean, like you say, oh, if you have,
I think that's just an issue with how the problem of evil works at a fundamental level. So, yeah, I can agree that just means that the problem of evil doesn't work as like an internal critique and it can never work. But I mean, I don't really have an issue with like saying that the problem of evil just doesn't work as an internal critique. I mean, that's kind of the point of my presentation, that whichever route you go, and especially if you go the internal critique route, the problem of evil just can't get off the ground.
Okay, but why is that? Okay, let me see. You seem to me say, this is what you seem to be saying. Okay, an internal critique is that you first agree to the worldview, right? And because you agree to the worldview, then the worldview is true. And because it's true, then the internal critique must fail, right? I mean, nobody will be ever able to make an internal critique.
Well, no. An internal critique is when you look at the entailments of like a view. So you would take on like every worldview is going to be like a set of propositions, right? So if you have propositions like A, B, and C, so an internal critique would be saying, here's these propositions A, B, and C. Let's assume these propositions are true.
So I think the argument that like modern atheism is getting at, and we do address it, but it might be useful to like do it here as well, because the thing is that we had a limited amount of time, so I don't know if like we should have talked about that more or not. What are your thoughts? Because we kind of like brushed past this after a bit.
Sorry, I was looking at the comment. Brush past what?
Like the whole issue of like, does my solution to the problem of evil make internal critiques as a whole unviable? Because I mean, one of my arguments was that like basically, if you assume our framework, then the problem of evil doesn't get off the ground, and so it can't work as an internal critique. And I think the counter argument is like is by saying that, well, hey, if you want to use this type of argument, then no internal critique is valid or sound, which is an issue, obviously, because we want to like use internal critiques against like Islam, right?
Right.
So what are your thoughts
Well,
on
I
that?
mean, I guess what I would say to that is, like the thing about internal critiques is that a requisite to internal critiques is that you steel man, the claims that your interlocutor is making, and if that is not the case, that the interlocutor is making these definitional requirements to certain omni attributes, say for example what this Bertrand Russell commentator is saying, then it certainly is the case then that the internal critique doesn't work. Now, as far as like saying, oh yeah, well, I assume my worldview is true, therefore the internal critique can't work, that would just be like committing the straw man
Yeah,
of
I don't
what
know. I feel like yeah, that might. I think that the other like big contentions that like because my entire point is that the internal critique can't work because well you might want to put up modern atheism's next comment. So like
I just kind of
basically
felt your response was, hey, Job acknowledges evil exists, so the internal critique cannot possibly work.
yeah the my whole point with the internal critique point is that basically in an internal critique using the problem of evil, if you're going to be dependent on a set of premises and one of those premises requires a moral framework, that means that that premise has to be justified by our moral framework, given that it's an internal critique. But since it can't be justified by our moral framework, it follows that the internal critique fails. And that was kind of my point. And this just applies to all internal critiques because all internal critiques work by having a set of premises, and those premises are justified within the paradigm. But if you can't justify them from within the paradigm, then it doesn't work as an internal critique. You would have to either just say the premise is unjustified or it's justified external to the paradigm, in which case it becomes an external critique. But that's an issue if the problem of evil is meant to be an internal critique. Um, as for the Burt Russell comments, he's like free to join the Discord and debate us on the ImagoLogos server or like the
Yeah,
IP
for
server.
sure. And I'll put a link to the Discord server later, but yeah, like even modern atheism wouldn't argue this way. Like this dilemma between two unfavorable outcomes, like yeah,
Yeah,
like
because he used this is
the
more of like
logical problem of evil honestly has been busted, so
yeah,
yeah.
he would use more of like a probabilistic version, not like a logical one.
Yeah.
Yeah, but also I don't believe that external was doing what was assumed, which was just saying outright the internal critique is not valid, therefore don't use it in a debate. I think what he's getting at is the implication that the sort of paradigm that you're going to be assuming does not have any sort of issue so far as in if it's the case you cannot grant some external conflict. So for example, if you say like, well, the moral framework within a Christian view when it comes to extrapolating the traits of perfect being theism, um, if you were to say something like, well, one of the issues is it conflicts with some, I don't know, moral properties or normative features in reality, then again, as external had already addressed in his opening, then this would just be a burden on the atheist or the person using the argument to prove. Because if you are assuming our paradigm, it's either the case that you don't really lead to any conclusive argument, or it's the case that you have to substantiate it in some other means, i.e., apply some external critique in which there might be a contradiction, or it will affect the traits as being like less probable, in
Yeah,
which that would
and
just push it to an external.
yeah, and then like as far as like picturing like where we're coming from modern, like imagine if someone was making an internal critique against you that say, for example, that atheist societies are better than Christian societies. And then one response a Christian could give is, well, hey, look at the Soviet Union, look at socialist societies, which are like predominantly like atheistic, like for example, like how it was mandated in the Soviet Union, that, as far as to the best of my knowledge, that some form of like Jesus mythicism in a lot of their scholarship. But then you could easily say, oh yeah, they're not real atheists. Like they don't uphold like to secular humanistic values, and so you would have to assume our atheistic moral paradigm in order to say that, well, atheists actually don't produce better societies. And so it's kind of like this kind of like a situation where like in the internal critique against the atheists, we have to assume the definition of what it means to be a secular humanistic atheist. Hopefully that helps in terms of like understanding like what it means to like make a valid internal critique. But anyways, let me continue this.
Can we derive a contradiction, right? So, for example, right, let's say with, I don't know, like, let's say with P and not P. Let's say some worldview has those two propositions. If you were to do an internal critique, then I would say, hey, this worldview has P and not P. So, therefore, because of the law of non-contradiction is true, and since you cannot have P and not P, therefore this worldview fails as like an and then that would be like an example of a successful internal critique.
Right. So P would be, okay, do you want to say something else?
I can like give another example. I mean, like one example that you might see with like people use in like apologetics would be like the Islamic dilemma. Like they'll say Islam affirms these propositions, and these propositions are going to entail some internal inconsistency, and so that's what they're going to use as like an internal critique. So if you're going to say that like my view of what an internal critique entails, that like the problem of evil can't work as an internal critique, then like I mean I agree, but I don't see how that would extend to other internal critiques, because I think other internal critiques can work fine as long as they're done properly.
Sure. Okay, let me give an example on that. Maybe to see if we're on the same page. I see that something that he brings up is that the marriage of Muhammad to Aisha. And what if an Islam Muslim say, okay, you're trying to make an internal critique, but Islam entails that the marriage was morally okay somehow, even if we don't see how, and therefore the internal critique completely fails, and there is no internal limit. That's what you're doing here, right? You're not really explaining how it is morally fine. You're just saying, okay, because Christianity entails the truth of Christianity, that it has to be morally fine, and that's it. The internal critique is not possible.
Well, the issue I have is that I don't think the Aisha argument is necessarily an internal critique, because the way that the Aisha argument is justified is you're going to say, here's like a bunch of studies that shows child marriage is harmful, right? So this is just going to be something that like we can just establish empirically, for example. So
okay, maybe I don't have an example. Okay. Yeah, okay. So maybe that one.
Even if it is an internal critique, like for example, what you can do is say that here Islam is going to like take you to this meta-ethical view, and maybe this meta-ethical like normative view is going to entail that we can use empirical research to better the world or something like that, right? But then at the same time, it promotes this thing which has been shown to be empirically negative. Like so, you can frame it as an internal critique that way as well. And as long as you can justify the premises from inside the belief, then it works.
Yeah, so okay, I don't want to go around in circles. So maybe what does Christianity say about what benevolence means, and like does Christianity explain why does God allow suffering and evil? What Christianity is like a response to that?
So, firstly, I would say that Christianity just defines like benevolent or like omnibenevolent as just being all good. So when we say God is omnibenevolent, we're just saying God is all good. And depending,
what does good mean? Sorry for interrupting. And what does good mean?
So there's two definitions I could take for this debate. So the first one would be like a natural law view where goodness and being are convertible. So like for example, right, you can say a knife is good because the knife is adhering to its nature. And so likewise, because God is identical to its nature, it's going to be, obviously adhering the most to its nature, and thus God will be all good. So that's how like an Aristotelian would view the word good and how that applies to God.
Okay, but did that come from Christianity, or was that like your philosophical development from later on?
We don't want to
depends on what you constitute as the sources for Christian revelation. Because obviously if you go
Loki, I feel like we both got like stuck on this part as well, on like the natural law part. Cause
Yeah.
I felt like we were going in circles in the natural law part, and so, I guess I might as well just explain it, because natural law is obviously going to be like a theory about ethics and about what is ethical, and it's going to use basically Aristotelian concepts such as what a nature is. So like a nature is just going to be some intrinsic like principle of motion, and it can be like it's commonly said that a nature is what a thing is. So, for example, with human nature, like humanity is going to be a nature itself. But something like being red-haired or something like that, that's just going to be an accident that certain humans have. That on its own isn't a nature. However, certain things can have certain dispositions or proper ends based on their nature, right? So with humanity, maybe you could say the proper end of man is toward God, right? But then, under a natural law view, we would, for example, use the example of, let's say, a knife. The proper end, or like the nature of a knife, is to cut things well. So a good knife would be a knife that adheres to its proper end or nature. And I think we got stuck on this part. And I think one of the reasons why we got stuck on this part may have been because we were working with different definitions of the word nature. Because one of the examples that was brought up is like, what if there was something that had like a nature where its nature was to cause things to suffer? but I don't think that's like a proper usage of the term nature, because I don't think nature is just like refers to any properties. Like if something has the property of making something suffer, I don't think that means it has the nature to make something suffer. Because I think making something suffer would be a privation that is only going to be like that's going to be like an accident a thing has, not like a nature. So nothing could exist which has like the proper end to make other things suffer, if you get what I mean. But instead that would just be like a privation of its being.
Yeah. The issue here is again, there's this sort of misunderstanding in terms of what semantics are referring to. So there's going to be a referent when we say morality, and they're going to exist in two different ways. One's going to be expressive of an actual property and that's innate, typically one that's transcendental and coextensive, such as being and goodness, in which we talk about the essence of God. And then the other one is going to be derivative sets of imperatives, typically those that are associated with our general understanding of moral properties or phenomenon. So modern atheism, what I tried to explain before is when we talk about morality, it's sort of when we talk about morality and goodness in terms of our imperatives, we're expressing some understanding of like assertoric and ontic views of morality. So we have like this sort of actions or an elicitation of actions based on like what moral properties are present. What External is explaining when he's talking about goodness under the Aristotelian or St. Thomas Aquinas view is to say that it's coextensive so far as in the essence of God would be in this predicated manner, like goodness, and predicated just like semantically. But there's two different like sort of semantical usages of morality when we're talking about goodness. So I think that's just a lot of the issue for this debate was you had a specific understanding of what's good in terms of how you would parse out morality, and External was going, as he explained, based off of natural law, like just Aristotelian metaphysics and understanding of goodness.
Yeah, I think this kind of gets into like how we both had a different understanding of what nature was, which I think could have caused the confusion. Because
Yeah, for sure.
for me, nature isn't just like any random thing. Like I can't say that like for example, he gives the example of the broken knife. Now, one of the responses you could give is like, let's say there is a broken knife nature. Well, I can just say that a broken knife is good insofar as it is a broken knife. But I think the bigger issue is that being broken is an accident, even but its nature is still being a knife. So it's still bad because it's not adhering to like the proper end of its nature, but because it has this accident of being broken. I don't see how that makes everything good though. That's the issue.
Well, it
Everything
depends.
or like everything and everyone.
Yeah,
I don't because
every. Go ahead.
like some things are gonna have accidents which like detract from the proper end of their nature, which is kind of the example with the broken knife thing.
Yeah. And you could grant that view and say everything's good so far as in there's some sort of aspect of theological predication to some understanding of perfection. But the
Yeah, like
issue is we don't typically apply those to like inanimate objects because they have no agency or animation.
either way though, I gave two definitions of good. We kind of stuck on the natural law thing um before I even got to give my second definition, because I said the first definition of good is going to be under natural law, which I think you can say is compatible with Christianity and can be derived from tradition. I don't think it's like a necessity to be Christian. Obviously, like I think you can have like, you know, a different moral framework and be like Christian without holding to like, let's say, I don't know, like a natural law. Maybe you can hold to like some form of deontology, right? Either way, I think natural law is very compatible with Christianity. But if like I didn't, so the second definition though would be like a person is good if they do actions which are morally good. So, like, this goes into like how modern atheism said, okay, well, I distinguish between like an inanimate object being good and like a person being good. If we accept that, right, then we can distinguish between actions which are inanimate and persons which are animate, and say that like a person is good if they have certain actions which are good. And so that's how we would define a person being good. So like there's the natural law definition that something is good if it adheres to the proper end of its nature, or something is, or we could adhere to the second definition where something is good if it does actions which are morally okay.
Yeah, okay. And as far as like the fake Bertrand Russell was saying, Christian doctrine is merely the product of primitive minds. I'm happy to debate you. I'm pretty sure some of us else would also be happy to debate you on this topic on the ImagoLogos Discord server. So yeah, yeah, let's continue.
By the biblical text, then we could like go into examples where, like, for example, Paul like talks, like, cites Aristotle, and I can maybe argue from that. But either way, though, right? If we take church tradition as like a source of like doctrine, for example, which even someone who affirms sola scriptura can say that tradition can lead you to truth. We can say that, hey, this is like the traditional view of theism that was passed down like throughout the church, and so that justifies our belief in it.
Okay, here's my issue with that. I talk about this with Lamb. I talk about meta-ethics. I don't think that's the definition of the word good at all, right? When you say morally good, that's nowhere near, okay, there's nowhere near, nobody who thinks the word good is the same as somehow being, right? That would be good is something trivial. Okay, a knife is good because it's good, the knife is consistent with its own nature. Okay, what could possibly be bad? Could a gun be bad? No, the gun is consistent with its own nature. Is an atomic explosion bad? No, because that was consistent with its own nature.
Well, hold on. Okay. The thing is with God, right? We're going to say he's identical to his nature specifically, right? And with the knife thing, right? Wouldn't it be intuitive that a knife being good is adhering to its nature? Because, like, for example, right, the whole nature of a knife, or like the whole point of a knife, is that it cuts things. So if a knife cuts things well, it's adhering to its nature well, and that's why we say the knife is good. So
yeah.
I don't. So I mean, like, if anything, I would say that's like the intuitive definition of good, that it's adhering to like its purpose or design or nature.
Right, but I mean, a broken knife adheres to its nature of being a broken knife, right? But so it can never be bad. So what I think, for example, when people say guns are bad, right? What they mean is they cause bad things. So knives, a knife, and again, it depends on context. A knife can be good or bad, right? A knife is good in the sense that it works properly. So it does what it's, as an instrument, it does what it's supposed to do. But a knife is not morally good. I don't think the word good here, I think it refers to morally good. It applies only to
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, you have something? Okay, I thought you were finished with that.
No, I just want to say very quickly. The word morally good, not the word good in general. Like when I say this pen is good, it means that the pen works. But when I say this person is good, it's different. So it's not the same word, I think. Morally good is to mean something that would apply to an agent, right? That's what I would say.
Okay, so I'm actually glad that you kind of brought up the example of the bad knife, right? Because let's say you're evaluating whether or not the knife is good, right? You can say the knife, like let's say you have a broken knife, you can say this knife is bad insofar as it is a knife, but the knife may be good insofar as it is a broken knife. So if you're considering it insofar as it is a broken knife, then a broken knife is going to be good at being a broken knife, obviously, but it's not going to be good at being just a regular knife. And another thing is that, like, obviously for us, I wouldn't necessarily say that there's like a broken knife nature, but I think that's going to get us more into like metaphysics rather than ethics, which I don't know if that's like, is like the proper place to get into. But to your second point, right? The issue is that I don't really like, I don't see a need to distinguish between these two types of goods. So, like, if I'm saying a person is good and a knife is good, then in both.
That kind of gets into what I was saying about how we have like different definitions of what nature is. And so when I speak about like something adhering to its nature, he may have understood something differently from what I meant. Granted, though, I did clarify that I'm using nature in like the way it's used for natural law, and then later on I defined what nature is.
For sure. Okay, yeah, let's continue.
Both cases, I'd be fine with just saying that this person is, adhering to their proper purpose or like adhering to their nature. So in both cases, I think that the definition of good would like work the same.
I disagree with that. So I mean, I think the word.
Can you hear that, by the way, guys?
Yeah, can we hear the video?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can hear it.
Okay, bad.
Morally good entails something different than when you use apply to others. I don't think. I mean, we got the language is like that, right? So we got the same word, but I don't think it really the same word. The same. It implies the same thing. So let me ask you this. Here's my problem with this. So you're telling me that when the Bible says, when Christianity says God is benevolent, but the only thing that this proposition is implying is that God is consistent with his own nature, and that's it. That's what it implies. But I think that's obviously not the case. I think it implies something like what the normal person will understand. It implies that God is kind, that God is fair, that God is going to do good things. I think benevolent implies that, not that okay, God is consistent with his own nature, because that's like
Well, I would say that God being benevolent does imply that, because things like love, justice are his nature. So God being consistent or identified with his nature would be the same thing as him being like loving and kind and so forth.
Right.
But I think one other thing that we should go back to, though, is we seem to be focused on this sort of idea of what is the standard meaning of terms. But then I'm kind of curious, right? I can like share my screen again if needed. But when I went over the whole part about like abstraction of concepts, where we go from particular instances to talking about the like universal concept itself, do you like have a disagreement there? Because if you were to use that method, then I think you could derive something like natural law theory somewhat easily, which would be in favor of me.
Right, I think I do have some issues with what you say. For example, you say that water, our colloquial definition of water, it's H2O. I think that's not our colloquial definition of water. I think the colloquial definition.
Here, I'll put it back up so you can see what specifically I'm talking about. All right, there you go.
I see it too small. Do I have to wait? Okay, I see it big now. Okay, so I'll say how we're different, but then, okay, I have to.
Yeah, 'cause my point was that the water refers to H2O, right? But if you were to go to like ancient Greece, the standard understanding of that term would just be that term refers to an element. So the understanding of the term is different from like what it actually refers to. So like likewise, if you want to talk about like benevolence, you're gonna have to distinguish between what the term refers to and like what people typically understand that term to refer to. Because the way that we would understand a concept like benevolence, I think, would be based off of like a very similar method to how we would understand like what water is. You would have to go from particular bodies of water to like the definition of water. So likewise, I think you would have to go to like particular examples of like what is ethical or like what constitutes goodness, and then from there get to a definition. Not just like look at the at like various definitions of good and see which definition is the most common.
Yeah, so let me see. I think the colloquial definition of water. I think we and the Greek had the same definition. Water is this liquid that is drinkable and something you find in river and the rest. I think that's the colloquial definition. I think H2O. I think that's not the colloquial definition really. That is I think that's the scientific definition, not the colloquial definition. Okay.
Oh, no, I was just agreeing that's not the colloquial definition.
Okay.
Because I'm pretty sure I didn't actually, like in this presentation itself, I didn't actually state that water is colloquially referred to as H2O, because I don't think that's required for the argument there. I don't think I stated that in the debate. Like maybe like after I did, but that was after.
Mm-hmm. He also asks, "Are you sure you're not confusing nature with purpose?"
No, I think natures can have like purposes or like proper ends which persons should adhere to, but
Yeah.
there's another comment right above it. Yeah. Let's say God is just in certain verses. Does the word just see what you take the word just to mean depends on your view of morals. So like for example, if you're gonna take a natural law view of ethics, then justice refers to like how they would cash out good in their framework. And in the framework that's gonna refer to like being adherent to your proper end or like it being adherent to your nature, right? But if you're gonna take like a deontology view, then goodness is gonna or like justice is gonna refer to like basically abiding by like a set of like rules and principles such as like do not murder and so forth. And so under that view, saying God is just means that God would have to abide by like certain moral principles such as like not murdering or whatnot, right? If you take like a virtue ethics view, then it would mean that God only takes actions that sort of increase or are in line with virtue. And so like when you ask, does God is just mean X or Y? I think in order to interpret that statement, you would already need a moral framework, which I think that's kind of the issue with looking at statements like that.
Yeah, and then as far as like the way I would interpret it, I would say that if we as humans became omniscient, omnibenevolent, and like all of the omni attributes, like if all of a sudden we morphed into God, then yeah, like justice would be the same way we would apply to God then as we would apply to us. And then he also says, what about the word generous, for example?
Actually, we go over that in the debate, so do we want to just wait for that?
Yeah, we can do that. Question for external: how does it feel to be my son?
Yo, this is I know what this is. This is Pure, bro. Pure is my son, bro. I am not his son.
Gotcha.
Okay, but let me tell you what I think is an important point you make. Okay, you say that what does it mean? What are you conveying when let's say within Christianity? What are we conveying when we say God is benevolent? According to you, what that says is that God is according to his own nature. And I'm like, okay, what does that imply? Things like fairness or kindness. And you say, okay, because it's also part of his own nature, right? But here's my thing. My question, why does kindness or justice, why are these things part of God's nature? And your answer better not be because they are good, right? Because that would be like a redundancy, right? And what I think is the issue, I think is the key issue. If we're going to define goodness as just being consistent with his own nature, then to say that God is good, that makes the statement a meaninless tautology. What do I mean when I say God is good? That word there is not giving any information, it's not telling you anything. For example, I say God is omnipotent, it means he can do whatever he wants. But if I say he's good, it's just that he's on according to his own nature. It doesn't tell me that he's going to be kind or just. You have to, you get my point.
So I think there's like two questions there. The first one is like, why are things like love, justice, so forth, like good in God's essence? And the second one was like it's a tautology when you say God is good, under my view, right? Yeah. Did you say yes? I didn't hear you.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so for the first question, I think we can distinguish like how that question is interpreted. Because first, if you're asking like how are love, justice, and so forth, like in God's essence, firstly, you can basically, I think one way you can interpret that is you're asking me, hey, what's the justification in terms of like my epistemology for believing that God is just or God is love or that love is identical to his essence and so forth, right? The justification for that would obviously go back to divine revelation, where we could just point to like verses which says that God is love. Now, if you're asking me like, what grounds God being loving or like what grounds God being just in like an ontological sense, I wouldn't say it's grounded in anything else. So it would be fundamental. So for us, God being just or God being loving is going to be something that's necessary and is ungrounded. And for the second question, when you say that it's a tautology and therefore it's meaningless, I don't think tautologies are meaningless because, like, for example, right? Suppose I were to say the person on the left is modern atheism. That's going to be an identity statement, right? But in that statement, it seems that that's also a tautology by the standard that you're using to say that God is good is a tautology. So if you want to say that God is good is meaningless because it's just an identity statement, then it seems to me that me saying that the person on the right to me is modern atheism is also meaningless. But I think just intuitively that's clearly not meaningless.
I mean, if someone asks you, if you say the person on the left is modern atheism, and then if someone asks you, okay, and who is modern atheism, and if you answer this, okay, the person that is on my left, then in a way, this is like you haven't really conveyed any information. In a way, he doesn't answer the question, right?
Well, I think it depends on what your knowledge of the person on the left was. Or well, technically you're on my right, on my end. I don't know what it looks like.
Yeah, on my right.
Yeah. So, let's say this person who we're talking to knows that there is someone on the right and they know certain characteristics, right? In which case, we could say that, since they know who the person on the right is, I don't have to give any further definition of who modern atheism is. I can just make the identity statement, and that's sufficient to like identify them. And then with God, because I've already defined goodness in such a way, and I've already explained in what way God is good, that being by being identical to his nature and being itself. Because like, remember, if I'm going to be approaching this from the classical theist position, then I'm going to say that God is being itself, meaning that like God is just pure act. So under my view, if I've defined goodness as that way already, then saying that God is good would be like perfectly intelligible in that way. It wouldn't just be a meaningless tautology.
I think let's see if we can find an example. And I was hoping maybe we could discuss theories if you want after this, but we will take it how you want. Let's say the statement, God is generous. Now let's try to see what it conveys. Now generosity, normally if I say externally generous, it means that this sentence conveying some information. It's telling me external.
For what it's worth, modern, in terms of like the solution to the Euthyphro dilemma being more of like an identity statement, it's just for what it's worth, it's more it's something that Thomists are like, they're more motivated by divine simplicity rather than the quote unquote arbitrariness of God's actions, if that helps. So
yeah, we say God is identical to love and that God is ungrounded. So God's love isn't going to be grounded in something else. Meaning that when God does an action that represents his love, that action is just going to be, the action is done in virtue of the love, but that love isn't something extrinsic to his essence. And I think I actually do put up a slide answering the Euthyphro dilemma.
yeah, for sure.
Likes to give me material things, right? Likes to give me gifts, for example. Let's just say for the sake of that is the normal definition of generosity, that he will have a disposition to give me gifts. Now, when I say God is generous, I think what everybody is understanding is the same, is that God is going to have a disposition to give you gifts. I don't think they will see, okay, no, in Christianity, actually, generous is just part of connected. So the statement God is generous actually means God is consistent with his own nature. No, that's not what it means. The statement God is generous does mean that God is going to give me gifts according to proper use of language. So the same will be with benevolent and morally good.
Well, when it comes to generous, usually if we want to predicate something to God in that way, we would just say that it's predicated in virtue of like the effects that God has. So like in this case, we would say that God is generous because of the grace he provides because of his role as creator, not necessarily like if you want to define generous as like someone who provides certain goods for like I guess you could say non-selfish reasons, then in that case God satisfies that definition because he provides grace and he provides creation to us, and also because of the incarnation.
Right. So God satisfies the definition, right? So again, I don't see what the issue is. So if you say God is benevolent, it's because that satisfies the definition of benevolence and the normal definition of benevolence, the way I see it.
Well, yeah, the normal definition of benevolence, in my opinion, would be like, it would obviously depend on some moral framework, right? So if we're going by natural law theory, where something being good is just going to be in some way adherent to its nature, then the typical or like normal definition of what benevolence is just going to be that or omnibenevolence, I should say, is just going to be that it's identical to its nature or that it's pure being. So when I say God is pure being, and that's what it means.
In a way, I kind of actually agree with this statement, because like there are like other moral frameworks that don't depend entirely on love, even though that's what most of the panelists, like all of the panelists, would define omnibenevolence as in accordance with the biblical passages. But
Well, I would
yeah.
say that God being loving is necessary, though.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's necessary. I would say it's necessary, but I wouldn't call it. How would I put it? Like, in our view, like it would be like tri-omni gods that are not loving exist in like Islam, for example. So,
well, the issue is, I think, like I think he's kind of assuming that God being loving is like a contingent proposition. And so, therefore, there can be a world where God isn't loving, but then consistent with his nature. But but I don't know when I bring up the slide specifically, but we do go over this and how, like, what's it called? How we would solve the Euthyphro dilemma, but saying that love is something necessary as being identified with God's essence. Because for us, morality isn't. Yeah, for us, morality isn't contingent, though.
Yeah, this sort of assumes that love is like some sort of like additive or accidental property in which like if he doesn't have it, then we would just attribute some sort of understanding of goodness to God regardless of that fact. But
Also,
yeah, then you just
yeah. I found the slides, by the way. Slide 31 and 32 that goes to the Euthyphro dilemma.
Yeah, did you want to go over these specific slides or
Yeah.
or nah?
Yeah, it's like for us, right? Like for the youth of our dilemma, obviously we would be motivated by divine simplicity, as Apollo said. But I actually have a one that answers both horns of it. So for this, we can let's just say a God wills things because those things are good, right? The issue is that this doesn't mean that goodness is external to God, which is kind of like why we would say the Euthyphro dilemma is basically a non sequitur. Because if you have like a burger that's eaten, that's going to be an effect, and the cause is a person, and that's done because of the desire. However, in this case, the effect is done via something that is via a cause, but the reason for that cause acting isn't something extrinsic. And what we're going to say is likewise, the reason for God acting isn't extrinsic. And so God doing something because that thing is good doesn't make goodness extrinsic to God. Rather, we can just say that the goodness is intrinsic to God. And in this case, with like the burger being eaten, the desire to eat the burger is going to be like a part of the person. But with God, the goodness is just going to be intrinsic to God via being identical to God. And so, like
Yeah,
the point we're getting is that in effect, being willed in virtue of something doesn't make that something independent to the cause. So in this case, the thing in virtue that it's being willed of is just going to be the essence itself. And then if you go to slide 32, we go to the different horn. So like let's just say that good things are good because God wills them. Like just let's just say that that's true, right? So the second horn. This doesn't entail that they're arbitrary because arbitrariness implies something random rather than something that is necessary or chosen. The issue is that even if moral virtues are ontologically grounded in God's like commands, that doesn't make them contingent modally speaking. Because being ontologically grounded isn't the same thing as something being unnecessary.
yeah, and you also got a possible debate with Malpass or Joe Schmid. So, would you ever take that?
Which I don't really know Malpass, and with Schmid, I haven't really read either his material either. So before I do that, I would probably have to read what they say on this more.
Hmm. Alrighty, alrighty.
He says if it's chosen for no reason, then that's arbitrary. I wouldn't say it's necessarily for no reason though. That's kind of the whole point.
So when I say God is pure being, and that's what it means for him to be omnibenevolent, I don't see how I've differed from what benevolence typically refers to.
Really, really, man. I'm like, do you see how? Really, do you think if I say, okay, God is benevolent, by that, a person explain this to a child, for example, God is benevolent, and he's like, what does that mean? Okay, I mean God is identical with his own nature. Do you really think that's a good answer?
Like to a child, I think you would have to explain like what we mean by pure being first. But if you're just meaning in like in our metaphysics, then yeah, like you would have to obviously explain. Well, like, before you even say God is benevolent, you're gonna have to explain what goodness is. So if our view of goodness is just that like it's adherence to our nature, then obviously when we say omnibenevolent, then God is just adherent to his nature perfectly. So I mean, yeah, that's what it would mean.
I don't agree with that definition. I think it's like I was saying, it goes back to the very beginning. I think it's very divorced from what the normal world entails. And it's like if I have a bad, and if I have a inherently bad nature, let's say God creates a being that is always evil, that wants to cause hurt others just for fun, right? But as long as this being adheres to his own nature, then that being is morally good in your world.
Yeah,
That's
you
crazy.
might
Okay,
want to
it's
pause
doing,
it there.
it's hurting people, you know.
This kind of gets into my point about like different definitions of nature. Under my view, you couldn't have something like that. And so like this scenario just doesn't make sense under my view.
Yeah, like I actually was tabling for Ratchet Christine not a while ago, and someone basically asked like, why couldn't God have like made us like born with virtues without suffering? And I was just like saying like, look, the nature of virtue that's in accordance with God is such that it requires suffering. So there's no possible world where no suffering is no suffering is required for virtue. So yeah.
No, I think this is sounds wrong to me.
Well, I mean, I would say that it's what you repeat that actually. You kind of like cut out for like the last part.
Oh, just it would be crazy to say that this a being that is evil, right? That wants to hurt other beings for fun. As long as this being adheres to his own nature, then it counts as being good under the Christian worldview. But maybe you would say that the word only words like that when applied to God.
I don't think that scenario you're describing.
Did you say to pause or not?
No, well, I mean, if we are paused, I would just say that like the scenario is impossible.
Hmm.
It's possible for like something to have a nature where it wants to hurt people though. That's something I don't think that scenario is possible. Because like when we refer to like nature, right, we're not referring to like a predicate in like a first order sense, but rather we're using the term nature in like an Aristotelian sense. We're not just referring to any predicate.
Yeah, nature is it's like the set of properties, the entire set of properties of a thing, right? It's
Honestly, I'm open to both scenarios when it comes to this. But what are your guys' thoughts in terms of like angels having virtue?
For us,
Um, be,
angels.
because like Jesus, for instance, talks about the fall of like Elohim or the fall of Satan. Um, so
But it actually depends on your view of what angels are,
yeah,
because
for
some
sure.
would say that passions require a body, so angels can have passions.
Hmm. The second one would be so ad hoc. The second one being they were born angels. Oh, they were born child angels and went through suffering.
I mean, if like depending on what your view of like passions are and like how suffering works, I mean, I don't see why saying angels could suffer would be an issue. Like, if you think that angels could suffer, like, I don't see an issue with that. Like,
Yeah.
in like
And
terms of like ad hocness, it may be in conflict with like tradition, but like from your view, I don't see why you would care about that.
yeah, and then I would say that in terms of like suffering, there are other ways to suffer. Like even as like a bodiless being, like you could emotionally suffer for the well-being of the creation. You know, we believe as Christians that we don't believe God the Father was crucified, but we still believe that he suffered in some sense. Um, whenever Jesus was being crucified. So there's that.
nature, all right?
I wouldn't necessarily define nature as like just a set of properties. I would say it's more so like an intrinsic principle of motion.
I don't know what that means, to be honest. Like for me, okay, the word nature in philosophy, it simply answers the question of how a thing is. Okay, how is a thing and what is its nature is the same question. That's what I was.
You can simplify it like that, but I think that how do I put it? Basically, if you want to like simplify it, you can say that nature is just what a thing is. But I think the issue is just like, for example, right, when you say something has a nature to do this or that, right?
I'll just say real quickly, I'm not sure what this refers to, but we can DM later. So
I don't think nature is necessarily work where you could take any quality of a thing and say it's a nature, right? So there's no like such thing as like a modern atheism nature, for example, where like if modern atheism is good, it adheres to like modern atheism nature. Because I think that's like the kind of issue with where you're going.
Okay. I don't know if we are going in cycles here or something, but
I mean, if you
this is more
if
for
you
the
want to
audience.
define, oh, okay.
No, it's fine. So I mean, when you think that, okay, I mean, for example, the revelation is telling us God is just. When you think that for this to make sense, the word just needs to be the same as what we understand when we say that a person is just. I mean, if you say, no, actually, in Christian philosophy, because of this super complicated philosophy, the word just for God, applied to God, only says that he's consistent with his own nature. That's what the word, and that's what Revelation was telling us when they said God is just. You mean that sounds crazy to me. It doesn't make sense, really.
Well, first of all, under like natural law theory, right, you're going to be saying that when you say someone is just, that's going to involve them adhering to his nature. And so like a natural law theorist is going to say that goodness typically does refer to something adhering to its nature.
I don't see it this way. I think when you say
I
something,
mean, if you want to define, like if you want to provide like a, I guess you could say different ethical view.
This kind of goes into like what I was saying with how you define these terms is already going to depend on your moral framework. So, like giving a definition for these terms already assumes a moral framework, which is kind of the issue. Because if you want to contest that my definition is correct, then like you have to kind of contest the moral framework basically.
for sure, for sure.
And also,
And then you
this
can
is
see how
where
that works. Like, I'm fine with like.
this is where I give the second definition that I talked about earlier. Because initially I was gonna say, here's two definitions. We can go with either one, but either way, it doesn't entail the problem of evil. But then we kind of got sidetracked with the natural law thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like for example, you don't want to define goodness like in that way. Then we can just define goodness by saying that like some agent is good only if it does actions that an agent ought to do, or like only action that is moral to do. Like if you want to define it like that, I'd be fine with defining it like that just for conversation. If you like are stuck up on the Aristotelian stuff.
yeah, I don't know. It just feels to me like a colloquial definition of good, what a normal person understands by morally good or by suffering would be sufficient, right? And I don't agree that being just is like adhering to your nature. That like really nobody I will never buy that. If somebody said the definition of just, okay, is that it adheres to your nature? It's like what? No, the definition of just is that it gives to each as it deserves. That obviously conveys what the word means, not what you say doesn't convey what the word means. So it's like you're using words in such a diverse way to what they actually mean in normal language.
Well, I mean, to be fair, once again, I feel like this just gets back into what I said about like how we abstract concepts. I mean, once again, I'm fine with just granting that we can take a different view of morals besides natural law theory, because I think that would just get to the same like that would get us to the same end that we would get if we went by natural law theory. So like, let's just assume for argument that we're not going to go by natural law theory, and we're going to say that an agent is good insofar as it produces like good actions, for example, right? So when we say God is good, then just the question becomes, what constitutes a good action, and how do you know what that is?
I don't. Okay, so let's agree. Maybe we have a lot of putting.
You know this guy, right? External.
Do I? Sean Swindon.
I think he's joking, because I remember seeing him in one of my lives before.
Is he talking about me, or is he talking about modern atheism? Because the thing is that...
Oh yeah, that's true. I assumed he was talking about us, but I don't know
Yeah, because
actually.
I saw that critique brought up that by Clueless. So like, I feel like that he feels like that, or like a fan too. That a lot of this kind of just assumes modern atheism's moral framework. Um, but like, he needs to actually justify it, and so focusing on like my moral framework is kind of like, in a way, the way he does it is question begging because he hasn't actually proven his. He kind of just assumes it.
Hmm.
3 minutes, so maybe we can, instead of going back in circles or this, we can maybe talk about a bit about theodicy, because in your video you also talk a bit about this. Maybe if you agree to that. So why were you, okay, but what you just asked, how will I define good? I don't think I have to give you a complete definition of good. It's enough if we agree that suffering is bad. Okay, I need to define good. Let's just agree that.
As far as I'm aware, you didn't appeal to Theodicies, but what do you think he was thinking of whenever he said in your video you appealed to Theodicies?
I have 2 videos on the problem of evil. One of them, I think I do touch on Theodicies a bit in the debate one, because that one was from 2024 when I was still working on the current argument that I have. Right.
Oh, okay.
Still working on it. So I incorporated a little bit of Theodicies, but as I worked on it more, I saw less and less of a need to incorporate a Theodicy.
Gotcha. I see.
That suffering for no good reason is a bad thing. Can we agree on that? Or can we agree that the idea of children being born with a genetic disease, that if you cause that for no good reason, that this violates our moral intuitions, or the moral intuitions of the modern world? Can we agree to that for the sake of the argument? Or maybe you see if maybe a theodicy would be important here.
I can agree that like suffering is a bad state. Yeah, I can agree that suffering.
So this kind of gets.
Oh, so I think that since it's your
Oh shoot! I think I lost a timestamp by accident.
Okay, I can find it real quick, but basically, right. I think this kind of gets back to what I said at the start about like whether or not intuitions can actually justify atheist moral realism, and if his argument is going to be based off of intuitions, then I feel like my argument would therefore pass.
Gotcha. I think my response to that was a girl suffering for no reason is going to be bad in pretty much all moral frameworks. No, I don't need to prove a particular one.
Yeah, but you're making another claim besides that. It's not just that. Because the problem, the problem of evil isn't just evil exists, therefore God. I'm sorry, therefore not God. The issue is that, well, if you did do that, then that would just be a non sequitur. But the issue is premise one: if God exists, then He would stop evil. Premise two: evil is not stopped. Conclusion: therefore God does not exist. So justifying the second premise isn't sufficient to justify the first, which is the issue.
Yeah, and to say every moral framework would say that like unnecessary suffering is bad is to assume a specific value to these frameworks. So you do have to prove a particular one so far as, and you have to prove your axiological application to like whatever said moral framework you believe is going to cause an issue to theism.
Defeat condition
falls upon you to justify that premise and to give like a substantiation explaining why it's true. Like that burden wouldn't fall upon me.
Yeah, I think I would just simply say that's the straight. You can look into any dictionary. Are you really disputing that a benevolent being will be normally expected to prevent suffering? I mean, if you tell me, okay, I don't expect him to absolutely logically eliminate all suffering, maybe, okay, but you need that he will eliminate or prevent unnecessary suffering.
I think this is the right timestamp. I'm not sure though.
Do you think that comes straightforward from the definition of benevolent?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think you are kind of question begging with this because you're kind of just saying that, like, well, you know, like, I think the definition of the word benevolent entails my position, but that's kind of like the entire dispute. The entire dispute is whether or not benevolence actually entails your position. And secondly, I think it would depend on what you're defining unnecessary suffering as. But I mean, like, once again, I think this whole like contention about like, you know, whether or not like I'm adhering to the typical usage of the word of like benevolence, I think this once again just goes back to like how would we get definitions? Okay, 1 minute. Okay, so I think this goes back to how we use definitions, right? Because I explained how we would get the definition of like let's say benevolence, right? And I think that you're going to need to go through that process. It's not just you have to cite a dictionary. I think you have to like go through the process of abstracting from like a particular to the universal in order for you to say that hey, goodness actually entails that God would stop all evil. But just citing a dictionary doesn't really do much.
It seems like what you are saying is like, okay, no, you actually have to go to the dictionary where it says benevolent, and you have to logically show and prove that benevolence entails normally entails not allowing suffering, right? And I'm like, really? It is like, are you disputing that? That's like obvious to me.
Well, my point is more so that like since like saying that benevolence entails X or Y, that's going to be like a moral claim, and so I kind of like I need a justification for your moral claims. Basically, that's kind of my point.
Yeah,
I'm going to let Modern respond to this, and then that'll be the end of the open discussion.
Okay.
I think I need to provide a moral justification for why sovereign is bad before I say that. I think as long as we both agree to that, then I don't have to do it. And if nobody trying to dispute that, it's like it sounds very weird to me.
Might want to pause
Yeah,
it
that's all.
All
there.
right. So
So,
that's the end of the open.
like the open discussion, kind of like stop there, obviously. But if it were to continue, I think what's it called? Like my what I was gonna get into there was about like how he was kind of equivocating on suffering being bad, and God therefore has an obligation to stop suffering in such a way that it would never exist. And I think that we can agree that suffering is bad and say that's self-evident. I don't think we can say the same about the crucial premise.
Yeah, and then Sean Swander was saying that he was critiquing just any like objective moral framework. So yeah, I mean, I would agree with this. We do ground morality in God's character. So alrighty. To the Q&A. How far do we want to go? Do we want to do my question and then Dan's question and then the
It
lamb?
might not be. Do you want to just end it here? Because
Yeah, we can do that too.
Yeah, it's up to y'all.
Alright, guys. Yeah, we're kind of running out of battery if it's not obvious already.
No,
But
it's more so that like the Q&A is like that we had a lot of trolling in the Q&A.
yeah. With respect to the Q&A, like we're running out of battery, like to finish off, like because this Q&A is like what, over an hour and a half. So like, one of them asked Modern Atheism to do some weird dance trick, for example, and you guys will have to see. Yeah, you guys will have to see ImagoLogos's cute video to check out what that's all about. But
yeah, just watch the Q&A on your own if you want to see it. And the Q&A definitely was one of the best parts because the Q&A was very funny. So I would recommend watching it, but it's not necessarily debate review material. So it's watch material, but it's not debate review material.
yeah, for sure. And my right AirPod just died, so yeah, we definitely want to close this out.
Okay.
So
Yeah, it might be wraps for you. I mean, I won't lie. Some of the Q&A being funny might be my fault because sometimes I was instigating along with the crowd, But I'll leave it at that.
yeah, for sure. Alrighty, that will be a wrap up, guys. Overall, I think, I mean, obviously, like me being a Christian, I obviously think that the problem of evil is solved, with a robust ethical framework. Like if the crucial premise can be denied, and there is a reasonable access to a framework where God can be justified for allowing certain evils, then yeah, I think it's solved. And for that reason, I would say that external won in that respect, quote unquote. I still think that Modern Atheism did a really good job in composing himself and trying to engage with like the points that external was making instead of like what you'll see like a lot of atheists do, like that fake Bertrand Russell guy, just like set up like a fake dilemma that like not like no one really takes the logical problem of evil seriously. But yeah. This is actually your boy Apollos signing out soon, and do you guys have any final thoughts you guys wanted to add for this video?
It was a good debate. Yeah, it was a good debate. I liked it.
Yeah, for sure. Alrighty, and we will end with that. Thank you all guys for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.
You made it to the end of this video. If you enjoyed it, please hit like, subscribe, and that notification bell for more content. Got questions or ideas? Drop them in the comments below. Until then, next time, thanks for watching. This is Boy Paul signing out. Peace.